Is this the most infamous and devastating press conference ever held by an American president?
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
July 8th.
It is not. Because you have the Afghan troops at 300,000.
Oh, yeah.
Well equipped as any army in the world.
Got the numbers.
And an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban.
Hardened soldiers.
It is not inevitable.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Oh, yeah?
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
You lie.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together.
Right now, over me.
Clearly have the capacity
And listen to the
to
Beatles.
sustain the government in place.
Free love, man.
Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam with some people feeling...
None whatsoever.
It's identical.
Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy.
Like right now.
6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms
worse.
of capability.
They're stronger.
There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comfortable. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Highly likely, you mean? Okay. So, Afghan President Ghani flees power as Taliban enter Kabul, seeking a peaceful transfer of power. 20 years, and we have failed. The president left the country accompanied by his close aides, an Afghan news channel reported, citing 2 sources familiar with the matter. And we can see, oh, wow, Taliban fighters and residents congregated around an Afghan army vehicle. So you've got the numbers, but without the legitimacy, it doesn't matter, right? Like, numbers are just minimal levels of importance in any conflict. This is why I get after the doomsday Christians that just want to do nothing but hide in their house and pray. And it's like, these guys resisted a military takeover by the United States for 20 years, and now they get their country back. You guys want to cry it's the end of days the second they say, here, you have to get this shot or you can't drive on the interstate. Like, get on your feet. There's a complete blackout in Kabul, heavy fighting going on. And there's a bunch of these videos. I mean, you can watch them. I don't care for war footage. It's always clarifying how horrifying society can get when anarchy breaks out. Anarchy. Let's see some capitalism bust out of that, right? It doesn't happen. Does that remind you of Saigon at all? I don't know. A helicopter flying near the U.S. Embassy in Kabul on Sunday. I guess it's just, maybe it's a news helicopter. Maybe it's just there to take kids on rides. It's kind of fair season, right? Panic and desperate in Kabul city. Traffic jam. Kabulis terrified about what will happen tonight before the fall of Kabul. Oh, boy. And so we're there. We've failed. 20 years we failed after the events of 7/11. And we were told that it wasn't the Saudis, it was Iraq and Afghanistan. And I want you to, look at the world map. You can visualize what is the countries between Iraq and Afghanistan. Right in the middle is Iran. And our greatest ally has had a very keen interest in regional supremacy. And this is a way of sandwiching Iran, putting pressure. You have U.S. troops in Iraq, you have U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and you were squeezing Iran, and now it has failed. They want to blame Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was a critic of these wars. But this has been a pivotal moment because the ability of America to enforce, quote, its values on the world is now seriously in question. Now, what I really wanted to show you guys was this this article from 2003. Like, how did we get here? Let's go back in time. Let's get in a time machine here from haaretz, something like that. April 3rd, 2003. It's called The White Man's Burden, where they write, the war in Iraq was conceived by 25 neoconservative intellectuals, most of them Jewish, who are pushing President Bush to change the course of history. Two of them, journalist William Kristol and Charles Krauthammer, say it's possible, but another journalist, Thomas Friedman, says it is not. So the idea here, you got to remember, we were told there were WMDs and blah, 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 you know. It had wide support from the American people because of the burning office furniture that caused Building 7 to collapse, and people were very horrified. But they talk about what led up to this. And it says, over the course of the past year, a new belief has emerged in town, the belief in war against Iraq. That ardent faith was disseminated by a small group of 25 or 30 neoconservatives, almost all of them Jewish, almost all of them intellectuals. A partial list, and this is important, it isn't a people in general, it isn't this or that. Like, this cabal, so to speak, is a very specific group of individuals. There's no monolithic establishment. Establishments are just individual people. And so this list of intellectuals includes Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith, William Kristol, Elliot Abrams, and Charles Krauthammer. These are the specific individuals who are responsible for this failure. You've got to single them out. The people that push this. They're mutual friends and cultivate one another and convinced that political ideas are a major driving force in history. They believe that the right political idea entails a fusion of morality, force, human rights, and grit. You know, I hate grit. One thing boomers need to understand is you were born in a political and cultural spring and came of age in a political and cultural summer. The reason you were able to grow so much is because it was a cultural and political summer. Your children were born in the fall, and we are now living through a winter. It is not the end of days. It is winter. If you just want to lay down and die, you're going to lay down and die. But you can survive the winter. There is a new spring on the other side of this, but you can't just give up. And if heaven is just populated with cowards that lay down and give up as soon as winter hits, maybe I don't want to go there anyway. Valhalla sounds a lot more appealing. At least that's a hall of heroes. That's my rant. The philosophical underpinnings of Washington neocons are the writings of Machiavelli. This is why I've narrated this book. If you haven't read Machiavelli's The Prince, it's probably one of the most important books ever written. Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Edmund Burke. They admire Winston Churchill and the policy pursued by Reagan. They tend to read reality in terms of the failure of the 1930s versus the success of the 80s. Have they committed an act of folly in leading Washington to Baghdad? They don't think so. They continue to cling to their beliefs. They are still pretending everything is more or less fine. This is 2 years into the war. That things will work out, though they seem to break out in a cold sweat occasionally. This is no longer an academic exercise. They say, we are responsible for what is happening. So are you responsible now that you've lost? The ideas we put forward are now affecting the lives of millions of people. So there are moments when you're scared. You say, hell, we came to help, but maybe we made a mistake. And now we know that you did. William Kristol. This is a regular contributor on news and media. You can look up William Kristol, very, very active. If you will it is no dream kind of guy. So he's talking about the success that the invasion in Iraq has been so far, that we have all this control. And It calls it could possibly be an elegant war. So, Crystal is a pleasant looking, of average height, in his late 40s, his late 60s now, I suppose, and is the editor of the right-wing Weekly Standard. You familiar with that one? Just keep in mind, take the names. And his status as one of the leaders in the neocon circles of Washington to induce the White House to do battle against Saddam Hussein, because Crystal is believed to exercise considerable influence on the president, vice president, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. He is also perceived as having been instrumental in getting Washington to launch this all-out campaign against Baghdad. He says it is simply inconceivable to him that America will not win. That's why you always have to consider worst-case scenario. What hubris. In the event that we lose, the consequences would be catastrophic. No one wants to think seriously about it. So we went into a war not even considering what would happen if we lost. So, and this is important. This is something I talk about often. What is the war about? Crystal replies at one level it is what George Bush says, a war against a brutal regime and WMDs. Okay, that's the propaganda, right? That's what we're told. But really, it's about shaping of a new Middle East. It is a war that is intended to change the political culture of the entire region. Because what happened on 9/11 is that Americans looked around and saw the world was not what they thought it was. Therefore, they looked for a doctrine that would keep them safe, and that was the neoconservative one. The doctrine maintains that the problem with the Middle East is the absence of democracy and freedom. Yeah, I wish we had that here. It follows that the only way to block people like Saddam and Osama is to disseminate democracy and freedom, to change radically the cultural and political dynamics of the Middle East. That's what it was for. That's what the war was. To change the culture and the political dynamics. Hey, maybe they would set up a democracy and fortify their elections so the only candidates they got are the ones that serve the interests of our greatest ally. That's what it's about, right? That's what all this, we're being punished right now because we elected Donald Trump because he wasn't the candidate they wanted to, or could control. It was basically so these handful of people could rule the world from Washington. He says the way to fight this chaos is to create a new world order that will be based on freedom and human rights. Yeah, I'm sure, like our medical passports, carbon credits, lockdowns, mask mandates, all that stuff that we have here. Yeah, talk about freedom, man. And to be ready to use force, and that's a scary line. He says they have to be ready to use force in order to consolidate the new world order. This is Bill Kristol. You can see this guy on television all the time. So what was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan about? It is being fought to consolidate a new world order, to create a new Middle East. They came out and told us in 2003. And then he talks about, he says, the American people, they don't want to fight a war over interests or values, political machinations and stuff. They wanted a war driven by a moral vision. And pay attention to that because they use this against you even now. That's what climate change is. That's what the COVID-19 is. They try to give you this moral vision. We're not doing it for political ends. We're doing it because we're a people that does good. And it goes on. I'll link to this. I highly recommend you read the whole thing. It's a little long, but you really begin to understand what the plan was. He says, because of 9/11, America understands that we had no choice. It is obliged to be far more aggressive in promoting democracy. Hence, this war. It is based on the American understanding that if the U.S. does not shape the world in its image, the world will shape the United States in its image. It was about reshaping the world. And it failed because politics, culture, and tradition runs far deeper than these people want to admit. It's not just a matter of, conquering it, letting them vote and putting MTV on it and promoting some, Israel-connected musicians like always. Now, I love Charles Krauthammer. What he says here, is this going to turn into a second Vietnam? The answer is yes. But Charles Krauthammer says no. This is a regular Fox News contributor. You see him all the time. He says there is no similarity to Vietnam. Unlike the 1960s, there is no anti-establishment subculture in the United States, except that same anti-establishment subculture created a foreign country 70 miles from my front door called the Chaz. So he doesn't know what he's talking about. Unlike the 1960s, people now love the army. Now we have a president with character. Yeah, grit. Grit doesn't work in the winter. Just saying. So everyone, you can see the fear. If we don't do something about the WMDs or the terror babel, millions of Americans will die. This is Charles Krauthammer. The only people that died were the Americans that were sent to the field of battle. He says, when he's asked what this war is about, he says it's about a war for disarming Iraq of WMD, disarming Iraq from something it didn't have. And he says that's sufficient cause in and of itself. So the big lie was enough. But beyond that, the war in Iraq is being fought to replace the deal where America would leave the Arab world alone and send us oil. Okay. And he says they're going to keep producing more bin Ladens. Yeah. We have no choice because of 9/11 to rebuild the Arab world. Therefore, the Iraq War is really the beginning of a gigantic historical experiment whose purpose is to do in the Arab world what was done in Germany and Japan after World War II. Of course, Germany and Japan, two totally different cultures, two totally different civilizations. It's an ambitious experiment, Krauthammer admits, maybe even utopian. Yeah, utopia is always bad. Don't try to make heaven on earth. We are here just to get through it. Whether it's left-wing utopianism or right-wing utopianism, it is always a disaster. Don't accept utopian visions. Just give people freedom, let them have their rights, let them have their cultures, let them have their traditions, and leave them alone. However, according to the Jewish American columnist, I wonder which one he's more loyal to. The present war has further importance. If Iraq does become pro-Western, and if it becomes a focus of American influence, meaning we can fortify their elections, that will be of immense geopolitical importance. An American presence in Iraq will project power across the region. What region? The region that Israel's trying to control? It will suffuse the rebels in Iran with courage and strength. Oh, so we're going to surround Iran, get those that are against the current government courage and strength, and it will deter and restrain Syria. And here they are talking about Syria back in 2003. We've watched this whole arc play out. That's why they said Donald Trump became president when he launched missiles at Syria. That was the one time he went along with the plan. He goes on to justify preemptive war. And what if the experiment fails? And what if America is defeated, as we have been? He says, Charles Krauthammer, this war will enhance the place of America in the world for the coming generation. Its outcome will shape the world for the next 25 years. If the United States wins quickly, it will be a colossus that will dictate the world order. Okay, well, 20 years later. If the victory is slow and contaminated, it will be impossible to go on to other Arab states, well, like Syria, and we couldn't. And it will stop there. But if America is beaten, the consequences will be catastrophic. Charles Krauthammer's own words. Its deterrent capability will be weakened, its friends will abandon it, and it will become insular. Thank God. Does that mean we will quit these foreign adventures and just stay home? Extreme instability will be engendered in the Middle East. Well, I guess Israel's on its own now. Right, Charles? You really don't want to think about what will happen, Krauthammer says, looking me straight in the eye. Because that's so. I'm positive we will not lose. We just lost. And so now we have extreme instability. The policy was a disaster. Thousands upon thousands have died. Legitimate governments have fallen. And here we are. Like, easily predictable. Now, Friedman has an interesting statement here. He says, is Iraq the great neoconservative war? It's the war the neocons wanted. It's the war they marketed. Those people had an idea to sell when 9/11 came and they sold it. So this is not a war that the masses demanded. This isn't a war. This is a war of the elite. Friedman laughs. He says, I could give you the names of 25 people, all of whom are at this moment within a 5-block radius of this office. 25 people within a 5-block radius in Washington. And he says, if you had exiled them to a desert island a year and a half ago, the Iraq War would not have happened. 25 people. And then he kind of hems and haws and says, it's not 25 people hijacked America. Yeah, it kind of is. There was a lot of support because they've got culture, they've got news, they've got radio, they've got music, they've got movies. They've got positions of power and institutions up and down. But it was basically, why did this happen? Because Americans went to sleep, because the bulk of the population came of age in the summer. Well, now we're going through the winter. And you've got to recover some cultural or political ground or even physical ground. This is why I have this channel, right? A guy sitting in the middle of the woods, I'm approaching 100,000 views. A counter-narrative guy, and 100,000 people have listened to me. This is something that I can do. You know, those of you that have kids, you can get on the school board. Some of you might be able to run for office or support those that run for office, or even just doing your job. You get to decide who gets promoted, who gets raises. You can help make America great again. And really, that's what this is about. All this, probably this oppression we're seeing, medical passports, climate change mandates, probably boils down to about the same number of people. It's probably a cabal of about 25 people that are controlling everything, full spectrum dominance. So it is incumbent on us to counter-infiltrate. Find a position somewhere. Nothing is too small. Nothing is too unimportant. You, me, all of us can do something to clean up the mess that these people have left the world in.